Welcome back to the part 4 of the complete HTML and CSS series. In this part, we will learn some crucial concepts in CSS before we can proceed with our projects. If you are just joining us, below you will find a link to the complete code of the first project of this series. Also, you will also find a link to the code of the last part of the series. Let's start by looking at how to represent colors using code. But before we can start coding, let's look at very important theory on CSS colors. There are many ways of representing colors in computer, but one of the more modern way is the RGB model, where R represents red, G for green, and B for blue. Every color can be represented by the combination of RGB. The red, green, and blue are called the base colors. To represent a color, we give each of the base colors a value between 0 and 255. I am sure we have seen this particular diagram, something like this, before now. Remember set theory in mathematics. So this particular part where we have pure red, we could say that this is represented using RGB 25500. So in this part, green should be 0 and blue is 0. Here, red is 0, green is 0. The same thing applicable here. In the middle, we see that we have white color. As in this case, we have the colors as 255, 255, 255. Now, if you look at the outside here, we have the black color. So in this case, each of these base color is 0. Here we now say we have RGB 0, 0, 0. We also have what we call the RGBA. So RGBA is simply RGB with transparency. So anytime we need transparency, we use the RGBA, where here is our red, green, and blue. Then we add what we call the alpha ratio. So this is used for transparency. When we will see this clearly when we start coding. So the combination of each of these base color actually gives us almost 16.8 million colors. We also have what we call the hexadecimal. So the hexadecimal in CSS is represented by using this hash, and then we have the red, red, green, green, and blue, blue. So in this case, red, red here represents numbers from 0 to F. So we have 0 to 9, then 10 is A, B is 11, C is 12, then to F. So if you count all these numbers from 0 to F gives us 16. So where we have red, red here, it could be 0, 1, it could be 0A. We will see this more when we start using them. Here, if you look at this particular hexadecimal color here, we have FF. So in this case, we have the full red and the remaining ones are 0. And here you see that we should have the pure red color. Now, what happens if we now have FF, FF, FF? It's just like when we have 255, 255, 255. So this is going to give us the white color. And in the hexadecimal model, we have what we call the shorthand. So we use shorthand like this, when all the values are the same thing. If they are the same, you could simply use FFF. So if we have 333333, then we should simply use 333 in the case where all of them are the same thing. You don't have to memorize any of this color because Visual Studio Code actually gives us a tool that simply helps us to pick any color we want to use. And also in practice, we simply go to several places to actually copy the particular color we want to use. So you don't have to memorize any of these colors, but it is very important to understand the theory behind this color. In practice, we mostly use hexadecimal colors. Then we switch to RGBA whenever we need transparency. So you will see that this is actually very simple when we start coding. So without wasting any other time, let's go straight and start learning. Let's start first by opening the web page. So remember, we have live server installed. So you can simply come to this icon here where you see go live. Just click on go live and this is going to open our web page. So this is where we left this project in the last part of the series. Now let's learn CSS property that requires color. And the first one is simply the color property, which we already use. So we already use the color property here. As you see on H1, we have this blue color. In your CSS file, in case you don't have your color shown like this, just click on this icon, which is the extensions, and here just simply type color. So first you see this color highlight. I already have it installed. Simply install this. And second, you also need the color picker. This is important. So I also have it installed. Just simply click on install and that is all. So now you can close this and come back to your page. Now, if you place your mouse on this part, you will see this color picker. Here you can select any color you want. You can just come here and click on any of the parts. So if I want something a little bit white, I will click here. And when you save it, you see the color on the page. So let's go back. You click here and you also see another version of the blue color. Now come back to this place. Here, just click on this. And this will give you the hexadecimal representation of the number you picked. So we also use the color on the H2. Here also, just come to this place and click on this RGBA. This will simply change this to the hexadecimal form of the same number. If you click on this again, you are going to see HSL, which we have not discussed. And I don't want to bother you with this for now as a beginner. All you need to understand for now is the RGB model and also the hexadecimal. We also have the HWB. Don't worry about that for now. In fact, in practice, most times you only need the hexadecimal and the RGB form. So let's change it back to the hexadecimal. So we have to go back and click on this one more time. So that is the color property. So the second property that actually requires color is what we call the background color. For instance, if we want to change the background color of this particular paragraph here to blue, all you need to do is to go to paragraph and the property is simply background color, this. And here we can set it to the blue we have in the project, which is 232347. And when you save this, you have this. But if you scroll down, you see that all the paragraphs, remember, this is because we selected the P element. So in this case, we are using the element selector, and we specified background color to be blue. And that is not what we want. Remember that this makes class selectors or using IDs very crucial. So remember, we learned how to actually select the specific element we want to style. So let's go back to our HTML. And here in our HTML, this particular paragraph is under this particular section. So here you see like, this is the paragraph, and we already gave it a class of text description. So let's simply select this class. Let's go back here, and I'm sure we should have it somewhere. So this is the class. So all we need to do is to remove this background color from here, and let's bring it here and now save the file. When you save this file now and scroll down, you see that only this specific paragraph is blue. So now let's change the color. And remember, when you use RGB, we want to change the color to white. And that means both RG and blue should be what? I can hear you say 255, 255, 255. And when you save this, you see that this is now white. Now let's come here and change this to the hexadecimal form. And this is still the same thing. Remember what we saw in the color theory? When they are the same value, you can simply use FFF and you still get the same results. If you change this to 000, that should give us black. So let's change this back to FFF. Let's look at one more property that actually requires color in CSS, and that is what we call border. So let's go back to our file and let's select this header. So this header is actually the header of our page. So if you go to the finished project, this is the header, this is the part. So we have the navigation, but this whole part is what we call the header in this particular project. So let's select this header and let's use element selector. That means we just have to select header. And for the border property, we simply write border. So in here, we need to specify 3 things. So here we can say 5 pixels, and we can say solid. And now let's give it a color. So we can use 333. And when you save this file and go back to the page, you have this border. Let's go back to our page and see what happens. So this 5 pixels here is what we call the border width. So that is the width you see here. If you increase this to 20 pixels, this should be more thicker, as you can see. Now let's change this back to 5 pixels. Now this solid is what we call the border style. So here we can also pass dotted. We can use dotted, and you see we have something like this. We also have double, so you can use double, then it's going to give you something like this. But in practice, most times we use solid. Return this back to solid. Good. And the next one is what we call the border color. So this is actually the first CSS property we used that takes in more than one thing, because up till now, everything we've been doing is just taking a single property value. So for this border property, it takes in 3 property values, but we can get the same result. So let's remove this. We could also do something like border. So here we can say border width, and we write 5 pixels. We can also write border. So the next is border style, and here let's say dotted. And finally, we have the border color. So here we say the border color, and let's use 333 and save this file. We have the same results, but in practice, most of the code base you are going to see, you see that they actually represent all these using the shorthand. So we simply use border, and here we just write our border width. In this case, 5 pixels. We can use dotted, and then we apply our color. So this is how to use colors in CSS. We are going to look at many other use cases very soon when we finally complete this project. From the CSS theory, we mentioned RGBA. So here, instead of using 333, here, instead of using this color, let's change this back to blue so that we can now use the color picker to pick any color we want. So let's use this. Now let's add a here. When you add a here, you need to pass in one more value, which we call the alpha ratio. And here you can specify any number between 0 and 1. You can specify 0.1. And this is going to be very light. You see the transparency here. If you specify 0.9, it's going to be close to the initial number. So 0.9 is higher than 0.8. And if you specify 1, it's the same thing as not using RGBA. So here, let's change this back to, let's say 0.5. And you're going to have this particular transparency. So this is how you can use the RGBA, but we see more of this very soon. At this point, I would suggest you kindly pause and play with all these colors before we continue. Now, let's look at what we call pseudo classes in CSS. Going back to our HTML file, we have a list, which is this unordered list. So in order to actually practice pseudo classes, let's add one more list here. So let's add an ordered list. And remember, in HTML, to add an ordered list, you simply use the OL, ordered list. So in here, you need to specify all your lists. So we can simply copy all the list here and put it here and save this file. So this is going to give us 1, 2, 3. For this is going to give us a dot here. But remember, so in our style sheet, we already selected the unordered list and we changed the list style to none. If we don't want to see these numbers here, we can do the same thing. Remember, you can use combinations, bind this, so you can simply say unordered list, comma, OL, and you give it a list style of none. And now you see that the numbers disappeared. So here, what we did is to select all unordered lists and all OL elements, and then we set the list style to none. Now let's go back. So to use pseudo classes, let's simply go here and let's select LI. For pseudo classes, you simply use this column, and here we could select the first child. So here, let's select the first child and let's give this a color of, let's say, orange. So all the first child, that is a list item. So let's go back here. We say all list item that is a first child, we set the color to orange. So this particular selector here is what we call a pseudo class. So to use a pseudo class, you simply select the element followed by a colon and then the class name. In this case, the class name is the first child. Now let's go back to our HTML. Here you see that home and the second one here is home is the first child and it is a list. So a first child that is a list. That is exactly what we selected. We also have what we call the last child. So if we say li, that is a last child, and here let's set the background color to green. And when you save this, you see now that CV, they are the last child, and the background color is green. We can also do something like this. So here we can say nth child, and in here now we can write any number. So if you write 3 and apply a style, or let's say text transform, and set it to uppercase, when you save this file and go back to the page, you see that the number 3, a list item that is the number 3, that is the third child, turns to capital letter. Now here we can also use even. So here you can also write even. So what happens is that all the list child that is in the even position, so here we have 1, 2 is even, you see 3, then 4 is even. So all the even is going to get this particular style. So let's also set the color here, and let's set the color to blue. And I'm sure you should know what should happen. And now we can even see this more clearly. Also, we can also use odd. And when you save this file, the odd now turns blue. So this is one way we can use pseudo classes. But there are always misconceptions about using pseudo classes. Let's go back to our project. So in here, we have this section, and now we have this paragraph, and then we have an image. If you look at this particular section, you see that this paragraph is actually the last paragraph. So here, what happens when we now select a paragraph that is inside this particular section? So we could simply give this section a class. So let's give it a class of hero. So now let's say we want to select the last paragraph. And which is the last paragraph? The last paragraph is this one. So let's see what happens when we do this. So we are referring to this particular paragraph. So we want to go to, we want to select the class hero, and we want to say the P that is the last child. Now let's set the color to let's say red, and save this. When you save this file and go back to the page, you see that nothing happens. And why? This is simply because this P is not the last child of this container. So you have this section elements wrapping everything. The last child in this, inside this section, is simply this image, not the P. So if you move this P and put it after the image and save this file again, and let's go back to the page, you see now that the P turns red. So it is very important to understand this concept using pseudo selector. Here we are saying any P that is the last child. So the P must be the last child. In these cases also, this li must be the first child. And that is why in most cases, we use pseudo selectors on elements that has like the same children. So if you go back to the UL, so here you see that the LIs are the same. You could simply select the first one, the second one, and that. So for pseudo selector to work, you see that the P must be the last child. Now, if you are selecting P that is the first child, as you know, this will not work. So if you do the same thing here, this is not gonna work because this P is not the first child of this session element. So let's also give that a try. So now we want to select this P, and this P has a class of text description. So this is this text description. So we want to select the hero, and we have text description, that is the first child, text decoration, and let's add underline. And when you save this file, you simply see that nothing happened. Why? Because the P, of course, this paragraph is the first paragraph in the container, but it is not the first child of this section element. This is important. Now, if you go back to our style sheet, instead of using the first child, you could simply use nth child, and here you pass 2 because it is the second child. And as you see, the style now is applied. This is important to understand whenever you are using a pseudo class. The last thing we are going to look at in the pseudo class is actually applying pseudo classes to hyperlinks. So let's go back to our HTML, and in here, so we have this link that when you click on this, it takes us to YouTube. So let's go back to our page and search for the link. So it is this particular link here. And I think that is, for now, that is the only link we have in our page. So we can simply select the A. So if you select this A, for instance, and you change the text decoration, so we want to basically remove this underline. So that is text decoration, and let's set it to none. When you save this file, you see that the underline is gone. Let's increase the font size. Let's increase this to, let's say, 20 pixels for now. But the best way of styling our hyperlink is simply by using the pseudo classes. And remember, to use a pseudo class, you simply need to add the colon and then the class name. So in this case, it is the link pseudo class. So when you save this file, you see that this still works. Here, we are selecting the hyperlink with an href attribute. So the hyperlink with an href attribute. If you remove this href and save this file, the style here is not going to apply. Then the next pseudo class used on this hyperlink is what we call the visited. So here we can also use visited, and most times we give the visited and also the link the same styles. So here we can set the, and here we can set the color to, let's say, red, and save this file. And now you see that this is red, but most times we use the same color for the link and also the visited. So I'm just doing this for us to just practice. The next very important pseudo class on hyperlink is what we call the over. So this. And for now, let's just give this a background color of, let's use RGBA. Let's use this and save this file. So what this does, let's go back to the link. And here, when you hover on this, you see the background color. So that is how you can style the different states of this link. So when you go to websites like YouTube, you go to google.com, you actually see this particular behavior on links, on hyperlinks. We also have what we call the active pseudo class. And for this, we can set the color to, let's say, 333. And let's also set the background color to, let's say, yellow. This is awful, but it's just for practice. Now let's go back here. When you hover on this, you have this. Now when you click on this link, you see that the color changes to what we specified here. So this is how you use pseudo classes on hyperlinks. You can use these pseudo classes on any element, and we will see this more. Now let's look at one important topic you need to know as a CSS developer, and that is what we call conflicts between CSS selectors. Let's go back to our code. Here in our HTML file, we have this h2, so let's simply use this my services, which is this h2 here. Let's remove this class, and for now, let's give it an ID of, let's call it services, and also let's add a class services. So now let's go back to the CSS style sheet. So here we have services as the ID, and we have my services as the class. So now let's select that same h2. So remember, up here we selected the h2 using element selector. So we selected every h2 and we gave a color of green, and we increased the font size to 30 pixels. Now let's move down, and here let's now select the ID. Remember, to select an ID, you simply need to use hash. Why? To select a class, you use dot instead. But now we want to select the ID, and for the ID, let's change the color from green. So let's see what happens when we now select it using the ID, and let's now set the color to blue. Now let's also select this h2, which is my services, using the class selector. So in here we could write dots, and the class name is my services, and let's set the color. In this case, let's set the color to red. So remember, up here we set the color to green, and now down here we are setting the color to blue, and here we are setting the color to red. The question is, which of this color is going to be applied? That is the question. First, let's save this file and see what happens. So when you save this file, you see that the color turns to blue. The simple answer is all these colors is being applied. So the first case, remember that this document is read up to down. So here we set the color to green. This color is applied to this particular element. And now we moved down on line 78. We use an ID selector and we set the color to blue, which is also applied. Now down here, we now use a class selector and we are setting the color back to red. It is also applied, but now there is a conflict among this color. I know I have not shown you the developer tool, but I am going to simply show you something. So in the next session, we are going to look at what we call developer tool. It is a very important tool. So here, let's inspect this my services. So under the element, we can go to the main, and under main, we have this hero section, and then we have this my services. It is this. So when you click on this and go to the styles, you see that using the ID selector, you have the color to be blue. You also have this, which is red, using the class selector. And then we have the H2, which is the element selector, and also you see color green. Now, in this case, you see a cross. It is crossed out. Here, it is crossed out. This is because there is a conflict. And CSS actually has a way of resolving this conflict. And this is what we call specificity. For now, you don't have to worry about that. But the only thing I want you to know is that, so let me simply use a comment and just indicate this here. So in here, let me write this. So when you use an ID selector, it has an higher priority than the class selector. So here we can simply use greater than class selector. So an ID selector is greater than class selector. A class selector is greater than element selector. An element selector is greater than what we call the universal selector. I have not shown you this, but we are going to see this very soon. So an element selector is greater than what we call the universal selector. So, and there are some other things that are actually greater than an ID selector. And that is what we call, the first one is the inline style. Remember how to apply styles to your HTML documents. We had three ways: the inline styles, the internal style sheet, and the external style sheet. And remember, we said we should never use an inline style. So the inline, whenever you use an inline style, it has more priority. And I'm going to show you this in a moment. One more thing that has more priority than the inline style is when you use a declarations marked important. So in CSS, we also have this. So this is greater than inline. Inline is greater than an ID. So let's see this in practice. So first we have inline. So let's go back to the style sheet, which is this. Now here, let's give it style. To use inline style, you simply write style, and here you write the property. In this case, we have color. So now let's set the color to, let's say, orange, and let's save this file. You see this change to orange immediately. Let's go back to our style sheet. So you see now that the inline is actually greater than the ID. So it is no longer blue. Now, what happens if I now, here I have red. What happens in front of this red? I now specify important. Save this file, you see that it becomes red. So once you stamp this declaration marked important, that is the highest priority. That particular style is going to be applied. But in most cases, this is not recommended. You should not use that. You only use that when it is very, very, very important, like it is needed. Otherwise, please don't use it in your project. So now let's go back and remove this inline style, which is this. We also don't use inline style. So in practice, most times we use classes for almost everything you will see in your CSS sheet. Is going to be classes. In fact, we don't even use the ID. We use the ID maybe once in a while, but classes is always what we use. Now, let's also look at the next one. We say that the class has more priority than the element. So let's comment out this ID and save this file. So we commented this now. Now let's save this file and see what is going to be applied on this. So you see now that if you move up, so here we've already selected the H2, which is this, and we set the color to green. Down here, we use the class selector and we set the color. So for now, if you remove this and save this file, you see that it is green. Now put back the class and save the file, you see that it is red. So this is what we call specificity. There are numbers attached to this. So we are going to look into this more when we start the main project of the series, which is building the Upwork landing page. But for now, I think this is enough. This might actually be too much for you at this moment, but please don't be bored. Just go through this, spend a little time, go to the MDN documentation. So here you can just type in conflicts, MDN CSS conflicts. So you can type this and you are going to see MDN web docs and you see what you're actually looking for. So please, here you can read more about the specificity. This document is very important. Reading documentation is very important. Next, we are going to look at what we call inheritance in CSS. And simply, as the name implies, inheritance means inheriting some properties, some styles from parents. So let's look at our document. Here we have this body element. So what happens if we select this body element and put some styles in there? Let's see what is going to happen. So in our style sheet, before all this H1 up here, because the body element, so is simply the first element here. So let's select it here and let's just set color and set the color. For now, let's set the color to, so let's set the color to this light green and save this file. Now, when you go to the page, you see that all the elements is actually inheriting this color. Only the ones that we specifically assigned some colors to. So if you look at this H1, if you remove this blue and save this file, you see that the H1 also inherited the green color. Why? This is because the body element, if you go to the HTML, the body element is the parent element to all of these elements. So let's set back this to blue and save this file. So you see that inherited properties are easy to overwrite. So here you see that we changed the color back to blue and it is blue. So you can easily overwrite this particular property. But not all properties in CSS are inherited. So there are some other properties that are not inherited. Just note that any property related to text is inherited. So anything related to text at all, if you set the background color and you set the background to red, everything is going to be red because background color is related to text. We learned about border the last time, which is this. So this border here, the border here. Now let's go back here and show you that not all properties are inherited. So for the body, let's say we set a border top. We have border. We also have border top, border bottom, and more. So let's say we set the border top. And here, let's say 20 pieces. And let's give this solid. And for now, let's just use red and save this file. You see that you only have this one border. Every other thing does not have any border. Initially, when we set color to green, you see that all the elements inherited that particular style. But now you see that for the border top, it's a different case. This is because the border is not a property related to text. So any property that does not relate to text is not inherited. So here you see that border is not inherited. The border is only applied to the body element in this case. So the body itself is an element and it is the whole page. So, and that is why you could see that the border top is just at the top of the page. If you change this to border bottom and save this file, you see when you move down, you also see the border bottom there. So in this case now, we could simply remove the font family wherever we assigned font family here. We could remove the font family and put it here. So here we don't need the border bottom because it is not an inherited property. So let's remove this. Now we don't need all this because we already removed the font family. Also, here we can also set the font size, and the font size we could simply set it to 18 pixels. So if you come back to H1 and remove this 32, save this file, you see that it is now smaller. But when you reassign the font size, you see that it becomes bigger. So it is inheriting all the styles here, but any one that we reassign here again, then that means we are changing it from the inherited style to exactly what we want. Now, the next thing I'm going to show you here is what we call the universal selector. So it is simply this star. So in CSS, we have this star. So this star is what we call the universal selector. And what this universal selector is going to do is going to select every single element on your web page. Now here, remember when we set border, so here let's set border top, and let's say 2 pixels, let's use solid, and let's set the color to red. Save this file, and before we save this file, what do you think is going to happen? I said for the universal selector, it selects everything on the page. Let's save this file. You see that all the elements on the page actually inherited this particular border top. Now, when do we use the body to apply styles to all the elements on the page? And when do we use the universal selector? This is very important to note. Any style that is directly related to text that you want to apply to all the elements, you simply put it in your body element. But any style that does not relate to text and you want to use it as a global reset, for instance, you put it here in this universal selector. We are going to look at a very important use case for this universal selector, and you are going to see what every developer, every CSS developer always have in their project. So now let's remove this. We don't need it. So later we are going to see, we are going to work more on this. Now, the next thing I want us to look at is what we call the Chrome DevTools, the Chrome Developer Tools. So here I am on Chrome, and to use the Chrome Dev Tool, there are 3 ways you can actually open this. First, come to these 3 dots, click on the 3 dots, and then you move down, you will see more tools. So down here, you're going to see developer tools. And this is going to show you all these tabs. So these are the developer tools. We have a lot of them. Another way you can open this is to actually right click on this particular page and you can inspect. And this is also going to take you to the same page. The next thing you can do is to use the shortcut. So if you're on MacBook, you can simply press Option, Command, and I. Option, Command, I. You are going to see this. And I think on Windows, it should also be Shift, Control, I. So for now, I'm going to just show you 2 out of all these tools. So the first one is the element. Now let's shift this a little bit and increase the size of this so you can see this very well. Now when you click on this element, you have this. When you expand each of these, so this is the head section and it's going to contain everything we have in our HTML document. This is the header section. When you open this, so you can click on this, you click on the UL, you have the first UL. And if you click on any of this, so here I click on this home, it's going to show you all the styles that is applied to that particular element. So we can also expand this, and you also have the main section. When you expand the main section, you have all the sections. So expand this and click on this. You see it is now on the H1. You see this on the H1. Click on the P, is going to move to the P. So let's go back to the H1. By the right, you see the styles. So when you click on the element here, is going to show you all the styles applied to that element. If you click on P, you see this also changes and it's going to show you all the styles applied to P. Now go back to this H1. Let me show you one more thing. So here you see that you can also toggle all this. So if you turn this off, you see that now the H1 is inheriting the style we gave the body element. Remember, we gave the body element green. That is because we turned this off here. So you can toggle this. You can remove the font size. You can remove the italic. You can do anything here. In practice, this is just the developer tool, and it is very useful when you are building your application, because in here you can actually check what is happening. You can inspect your elements. You can do a lot of things. Then when you look at this particular side, you see what is called the user agent style sheet. So this user agent style sheet, they are the styles that the browser actually gave our document by default. So these ones are not the styles we wrote by ourselves. They are the styles that the browser actually gave this document by default. Now, when you also move down, you see this particular box here. This is called the CSS box model, and it is very, very important. So we are going to look at this very much in the next part. Another thing you can do here, actually, we can change the color. You see, you can change the color. Let's change the color to this. And you see it is being applied. But remember, as I said, still this does not change anything, because when you refresh the page, you see that the color is back to normal. This is just for development, for you to inspect your elements and do many things. There are a lot. This is very, very helpful when you are building projects in the real life. Also, in here, we can also do some other things. For instance, we can add any style we want. For example, we can add a background color, and we can set the background color to, let's say, yellow. And you see the background is yellow. Now we also have this console. For now, you don't need this because this is useful when we start dealing with JavaScript. But for now, I think this is all I want to show you here. So from now on, we are going to be using these tools actually to inspect our page, especially when we are working with the bigger projects of this series. Congratulations! You've started using one of the most important